on in so you can either attend this class or another of your choice. There are some handouts if you would like them. They're back in the back on the little table, so feel free to grab one of those and we'll pick up tonight. It's good to have Pastor and Sister Gilbert from Mount Vernon, Illinois. Am I correct? If I said it wrong, forgive me. Good to have you with us tonight. I'm sure everybody here will want to come by and meet you and talk to you just a few moments. Nice crowd here tonight. All right. I feel like I'm in fast forward mode, so I'll try to slow down and pick up with some notes, and we'll see what happens. So last week, is there really? I don't. Is he dangling or something? Is it in front of me? Do I need to have a Holy Ghost fit right here and kind of take him completely out? Take the Word of God and just... Did I get it? Woo! Oh, I see him now. I see him now. Be gone. See, you never know what's going to happen when you show up at church. Tonight we had a spiderism, so who knows how this works out. All right. Well, thank you for gathering here tonight. This is, again, this is the third lesson of 4 lessons that I will be speaking about concerning the nation of Israel. And the order of the way we've done this so far, in case you've missed any, the first lesson was we talked about the idea of Israel as a nation, not to where it is right now, just the idea, the concept that God had given Abraham. And we went all the way through to the 400 years of silence. Last week, we talked about the climate of the nation of Israel when Jesus was living, and we took that all the way through about the 1850s. And then tonight, even though I think all these lessons are great, this is probably my favorite lesson out of all 4 of them. And the only reason it's my favorite is because I'm always intrigued by what I didn't know a lot about. And I think I told everybody, it was several years ago, I purchased some books because I wanted to understand where Israel really came from, not just the land since 1948 or the land that I read about in the Bible. What happened from the time 70 AD when there's no temple and the diaspora, when the Jews are kicked out of their homeland? What happened? How did they get back? And obviously the hand of God is in that. And so tonight's lesson is not so much biblically based, it's just historical. It puts us back to where we're ultimately trying to get to next week, and that is in 1948 through the current day. So that's next week's lesson. But tonight, we're going to talk about what brought Israel from the 1850s to really return to the land that their forefathers had owned. So if you want to go back 2,000 years ago, the Roman army basically destroyed the temple. They destroyed the city of Jerusalem a lot. It's been built and rebuilt. I have a book in my library. We were talking about this last week after the lesson. Jerusalem is an interesting city. Number one, just it's the city of God. It's everybody's city. But there's like 11 layers to the city. Once somebody conquers it, then somebody builds on top of that, and then somebody else comes in and conquers the city, and they just built on top of it. So there's a lot of excavation. That's why there's so much excavation in Israel, because it's basically a city just keeps getting built on top of itself. And so after Titus destroyed the temple and the diaspora, and the Hebrews are sent to the 4 corners of the earth, basically, they migrate and they travel to certain areas. And we talked a little bit about that last week, but we're going to talk about how they got back home. So there's the setup for what we're talking about. But when you get to the 19th century, in my opinion, it's not just a physical shift, but it's a spiritual shift that begins to take place. And I'm going to make another statement, and you know this, but we need to hear it, is that we're concerned about time. God is always concerned about eternity. And for God, whatever he says is going to happen, whether it happened in the time frame that we thought it should or not, that's going to occur. And so if you go back literally, 130, 40, maybe even 50 years ago, there's a lot of social pressures in the world. There's a lot of political anxiety going on. And especially in Europe, and that's where we're going to talk about this, it starts leading to a term that we use now, but at the time it was not even considered, but Zionism. These Hebrews coming back home to their original home. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we'll just kick off around the 1800s. So in the 1850s, Israel is not a nation like we know it today. It's called Palestine, all right? So I'm going to say a few things. I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but I'm going to piece this story together. And I meant to bring some books with me tonight, and I'll try to do it next week. If you want to do some more research on these your own, I went through a lot of books, but the ones that I found that had the most credible information and was not slanted with an agenda are the ones I went with, and I think this will help you. So from the time that the temple is removed, get well into, I would start calling the Dark Ages. The Ottoman Empire was pretty much what controlled the Middle East in the area called Palestine, okay? There's not a lot of Hebrews left in their home. They have been forced out literally by different armies, different thoughts of the day. And if you have the guide with you, you'll see I've left you several maps and several charts inside of the notes that kind of tells you where the Hebrew people went. And you'll notice one of the first ones right there. It says the region Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, and Lithuania. That was the majority. Millions of it seemed like Hebrews migrated into what is basically Western Russia, but they went a lot of different places. So the vast majority is living in Eastern Europe, Western Russia, and there was an area called the Pale of Settlement. That was the area that these Hebrews had gathered, all right? So that's what it's called, the Pale of Settlement. This is where they were permitted to live. And it's also an area that extends basically from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea in Western Russia. Now, life in this area is marked by a lot of overcrowding. It's an economically depressed area. There's a lot of legal restrictions against the Hebrews in their education, the businesses they can and can't own, and there's a lot of violence. Now, there's a guy, and you're going to see his picture in just a few moments. His name is Tsar Alexander II. He is a gentleman who has empathy towards Hebrews. This is important. So he relaxes some of these restrictions on them. He tries to give them opportunity to do what they want to do. Now, I got to remember, in the 1850s, these Hebrews are not the God-serving, temple-worshiping people we read about in the Bible. They're just banded people. We talked about this last week. They had synagogues, not temples. They had to tell the story of their history, a lot of it word of mouth. And I made that statement, if you remember last week, was so when the shepherd boy who threw the rock into the cave and he found the Dead Sea Scrolls, that was a big deal because some of their written history was coming back to life. The stories they had told was being validated again by these scrolls. And so this Zionism starts becoming a bigger ideal. But back to Tsar Alexander II. He is the leader in Russia, and he's sympathetic to the Hebrews, but he's assassinated. So this is an odd story. And his son, somebody comes out of his own lineage, his son Alexander III became the ruler by the assassination. And if you want to do the history, it's interesting. Alexander II was assassinated at a train depot. Well, his son Alexander III has no leniency toward Hebrews. Matter of fact, for as much as his dad was sympathetic toward them, he is antagonistic to the Hebrews. And so his plans are a whole lot different than his father's. His ideal is he wants the Jews gone out of Russia. He doesn't want to make it easy on them. He starts in 1881 a series of pogroms, which is simply mob attacks against Jewish people. You'll hear that word again when World War II rolls around. So thousands of Hebrews are killed. Their businesses, the little they had that Alexander II had given them the ability to operate, the businesses are destroyed. Their homes are destroyed. Their communities are literally displaced. And at this point, this becomes a catalyst, is the word I'm going to use, for these Hebrews who are just living in somewhat of normal peace. But I'm going to make another little statement here tonight. Status quo is not always the best thing. Living with lukewarm peace is not always the best thing, not in God's economy. And so there is a purpose for this. And so, as much as Alexander the Third is not a good guy toward the Hebrews, he sets in motion something that's going to happen that's going to affect all of us in this room today. And so, at the time, there's a lot of Hebrews in Western Europe. By the time Alexander gets finished with them, about 2.5 million leave the Pale of Settlement, and they begin to move to the west into Europe. Now, let's talk about Europe a little bit. And if I bore you, just get up, go to the bathroom, don't come back, and I'll know it was more than you wanted to take. But we got to get from where we're at to where we're at today, literally, from this point. So Western Europe is going through its own enlightening period. Your children probably come in and tell you the history lessons they've learned. We learned that when I was in school. And what this enlightenment meant was a lot of nations were starting to allow, what's the word I use, nationalism to come around. French people begin to take pride in being French, Italians, Romanians, whatever. And so now you've got this influx of 2.5 million Hebrews into Western Europe right about the time they're getting their own nationalistic ideas about themselves. And so this nationalism gave Jewish people the opportunity to integrate into the Western Europe communities. And they begin to have the freedom to be educated. And that sounds so odd to us who we go wherever we want to school, but then there was no education, especially for anybody that was being discriminated against. And so now these Jewish people are getting to be educated. They're beginning to take the talents that they have had for a long time, and they begin to put these wares into the prominence of finance and academia and arts and other professions. And so now Europe's beginning to grow, but they're growing with a lot of Hebrew influence. And I need you to understand this. World War II ends with the technology that was brought about from Hebrew people. There's a lot of irony. We're going to get to World War II in just a minute. And this is being live broadcasted, so I want to make sure I'm careful with my words. But it's amazing how sometimes we can put the blinders on so tight and destroy the thing that's making a nation wealthy and profitable. Okay, we'll get to that. So now these Jewish people are becoming influential. They're owning their businesses again. They're using their cultural wares into society, but also their intellect. And there's always going to be bigotry lurking under the surface of anything going on. So this is the 1880s, but there is still a strong anti-Semitic persistence going on. We have the Dreyfus Affair in France. A lot of you learned about that in history. And I'm not going to get into the history lesson, I promise you. I'm going to move you quickly to get to where I want to go. But this is where a Jewish military officer is convicted of treason. And depends on who you read now. Some people say it was for good reason, but at the time, it was very much a fabricated accusation, okay? So this gets people stirred up about, we can't trust these Hebrew people. This is about the time that a man by the name of Theodore Herzl, who is huge in the Jewish state becoming Israel again. He sees what's going on. He sees the anti-Semitism going on. He sees that his people, because he is a Jew, they're becoming more powerful and more prominent, but he also sees a need that they need their own nation again. This is a grand idea from somebody who has no ability to pull it off by themselves. So in the mid-1800s, there's not hardly anybody living, quote, in Israel that's Hebrew. Just a handful, under thousands, okay, just a few thousand. But most of the communities are living outside of Israel. So Theodore Herzl is the one who has this ideal of returning back to their home, this birth of Zionism, if you will. So now you've got a person who wants to see it happen, has the dream, puts the dream out there, and then literally he dies. 5 years after he starts this idea of Zionism, and it's not his idea, but this returning to the land of Palestine, what it's called at this point, he dies. Now, once again, let's keep in mind some other things. Nationalism is big in Europe at this time. That cannot be overstated. If you want to write anything in your notes, underline that. That's big. So with nationalism and the rise of Hebrews in Western Europe and Western even Russia, the Jewish intellectuals began to take Theodore Herzl's thought, well, why couldn't we go home? Let's go home. Let's go back to Israel where we belong. And I've left you some dates in here and some other early Zionistic thinking people, how they had influence. And I won't go through all of that. So Herzl's got this going. He writes a book called The Jewish State. He writes this in 1896. And it's a case for a Jewish nation coming back. He organizes the first Zionist Congress. Now, when we say Congress, we want to think like please, if you're a politician, know I'm saying this in jest and in truth at the same time. The inept that happens in Washington, D.C., let's get together and argue about something. A Congress is simply North American Youth Congress. We're going to get some people together. We're going to get an idea. We're going to put some energy behind this and get some thought working. That was a very uncalled for statement about our politicians. Strike that from the record. I should not have said that. But Theodore Herzl passes away in 1904. He never gets to see any of this happen. But his ideas spark a sentiment inside of Hebrew people. And I'm not Hebrew, so I cannot pronounce this word correctly, but it's called aliyah. I hope I'm saying it pretty close. It's Hebrew ascent. Waves of people begin to say, you know what, I do want to go home. I should go back to I use the word home, but the land that God gave us via Abraham. Let's make something happen. There's different motivations for this aliyahs, these waves of people wanting to go home, but they decide they're going to. I left you a graph in your notes. You can study over that a little bit later. So some people decide, about 7,000, not in a collective order, just I think it was God putting this on their heart. They said, we're going to go back to Israel. So they go back to Israel because they're going to try to start their nation back again. Now, this is where the information starts getting very, at least in my mind, interesting. These immigrants moved back into what is Palestine at this time, and they're trying to establish some farms and some cities, build some infrastructure. But I need to make a few more notes about this. And I didn't have time to create enough pictures, but when God gives the dream to Abraham, you're going to be a nation. It's just Abraham and Sarah and his nephew. I mean, that's not a nation. But after the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob takes his 70 into Egypt because Joseph, his son, can provide food for him. Then we read about Moses, and when the children of Israel leave Egypt, now it's at least 1 million men plus women and children, okay? So now we are getting to a large group. And I said this a few weeks ago. They're not really a nation. They're just a large group of people. A nation is when a group of people have structure, and have a military, and they have an economy they can work in. That's when Joshua came up on the scene. But you remember what God told Moses about where they were going, their homeland. A land that flows with milk and honey. That just sounds good whether you're hungry on Wednesday night or not. Milk and honey. We got cattle. We got crops, which means we have flowers and bees that are buzzing around and everything's good. But when these Zionist people decide they want to go back to Israel, they're not going to a land that flows with milk and honey. Oh no. Oh no. Just by simple nature of the last 1,500 years of so many armies going through Palestine and conquering it. And this is just history. There's no bigotry when I say this. There's the Christians having their crusaders going to run the Muslims out. And then there's the Muslims who are taking control of the area. And there's just battle back and forth. All the resources in Palestine are used up. Matter of fact, at the turn of the 19th or the 20th century, 1900s, when these 7,000 Hebrews go back to their homeland, it's rock and swamp or desert. It's not flowing with milk and honey. This is a very good statement. You need to make sure you understand this. When they show up, these Hebrews, back into Palestine, they didn't just roll in and go, hey, this is our land. Abraham said we could have it. Give it to us. It's owned by other people. Arabs. And the Arabs are like people in North America today. If you have property and somebody's willing to give you money for it, if you can find the right price, you'll sell it. Whether it's farmland or whether it's rocky, mosquito-ridden swamps, swamps are not rocky, I know that, but I'm just saying whatever. My point is that these Hebrews purchased the property that they received. There was no Arabs giving it away. No, hey, come move in. Here's a couple hundred acres. They bought it. But the property that these Hebrews were buying, I'll say it again, was swamps. Or it's very arid, rocky, desert land. So let's put this in context. You have these people who have left the Pale of Settlement, or their ancestors have, moved into Europe. They're working their businesses. They're good at being a business owner, but they're not best at farming, draining swamps, planting crops. There's a lot of work that goes on. There was an author who wrote a little biography or a book, but I took a clip of it, and I want to read it to you. This is how he described Israel, but there's no Israel right now. It's just Palestine. Quote, history had done the worst of which men are capable. Invading armies, improvident farmers, and ubiquitous goats have destroyed everything and the forest. Orchards have been given away to scrub and cactus. The old terraces are falling into disuse, and sand encroaches everything. The total effect of the land seemed to just simply want to reject human settlement. That is how a Hebrew settler saw, quote, Israel at this time. But there's a lot of challenges here. But the Hebrew people who are buying the property up, they start working on it. They begin to purchase the land. They drain the swamps. They plant some trees. And Israel begins to come back to life. And there are two narratives that are going on at the beginning of the 20th century, so the 1900s. The first one is this. Real careful when I say this. Arabs viewed Hebrews as European imperialists that stole their ground. But the truth of the matter is that from their point of view, that would be correct, but they sold the property to these European imperialists. Those words are big, whether you're catching what they're saying right there. Now, then there's the Hebrews. They look at it like this, very conversely. They claim the land has been ours from the time of Abraham, and they're simply reclaiming it. And I'm going to tell you a truth. Both of them are correct. The Hebrews are coming back to the land that God had promised them through Abraham. That's right, but they're purchasing it. But the Arabs are watching their property get bought up by an outside force going, this is wrong. And I'm going to put this in a little context. There's a lot of information in the news right now about the amount of American farmers selling their property to Chinese. You can shake your head. So there's other neighbors going, well, we're getting taken over by another country, but we're selling it to them. That didn't go over very well, and I didn't figure it would, but my job is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. So these two thoughts of European imperialists coming and taking property, and then the Hebrews saying, hey, we're buying it, it's ours to begin with. Both of them have a thought that's technically correct, if you want to put it that way. And can I tell you this? 120 years later, that's still the same two narratives going on in that same region. Arabs say everything is being stolen from us, and Hebrews going, we bought it and it was ours to begin with. We simply claimed what was ours. And that is the thrust and the crux of all the friction that's always going on in the Middle East, but that's it boiled down. We're going to talk about it a little bit more, and then next week we're going to get into the modern day of this situation. But in this pre-state era, this Zionist movement going back to its homeland, a couple of things are happening. The city Tel Aviv is founded in 1909, and I should have put a picture up of Tel Aviv. Brother Brian, I've talked about this. I was supposed to go with Brother Brian on a trip to Israel a couple years ago, and Hamas attacked, if y'all remember that, 7 days before we left, so that trip got canceled. I was supposed to leave in February or March. 7 days before we fly out, the United States attacks Iran, and so that trip gets canceled. So I don't think it's my job to get to go to Israel right now. But I was looking at the pictures of Tel Aviv. It's a very modern city. If you were paying attention to any of the newspapers that were showing the pictures of modern Tel Aviv, it's incredible. It's beautiful. It's not what I thought. So Tel Aviv, which is not even a city in the time of Jesus, it's part of this new wave of Aliyah coming into the area of Palestine. There is a revival of the Hebrew language. That may not sound like a lot, but there was a lot of Yiddish language going on, which was, I'm going to use the word very carefully, slang European, slang Slavic, slang Hebrew. So when these Zionist thinkers were saying, we're going to have a nation, they said, we're going to have one language again. This is nationalism. We're going back to the Hebrew language. You can read more about that. There was the collective agricultural settlements coming together, trying to make an ideal of what Zionism should look like. There was the Haganah, which is now the IDF. That was the beginning of a military for this nation. They're not even a nation, but this is what that Zionist Congress are trying to put together. And then finally, they did create the Jewish Agency, which was, a lack of a better word, an organization that was meant to help funnel or help Hebrew people get home. Are y'all okay with this? Anybody bored yet? Nobody's passed out yet, so if you do, I'll know what's going on. So while all this is going on, World War I breaks out, 1914 to 1918. It dramatically reshapes the Middle East. This is where history in the classes I took either in high school or in college got a little fuzzy. So I'll just give us a quick, overview of it. The Ottoman Empire, so I'm going to use the word again, is what's controlling Palestine. It's been doing this for several centuries. Well, there is such things as imperialism. And I hate to knock on our British cousins, but British imperialism was what was in control when the Ottoman Empire went out. The British just basically took over in that area, all right? So the Britons are running this. 1917, the British government issues the Balfour Declaration, which is a public statement expressing the establishment of Palestine as a home for Jewish people. This is a big statement. When, not the United States, but Britain says they should have a home. And they should have their home that they were biblically. Because, once again, at the time, Great Britain is a Christian nation predominantly. So they can see the need for this. So Britain works to open that up with the League of Nations in a mandate in 1920. Well, this thing goes good for a little while until it doesn't go good. Isn't that the way most laws work? It goes good until it doesn't go good. This tension starts working up, though. The Arabs don't like being controlled by the British. They don't like the British saying that Hebrews can come back home. So it's just a bad powder keg of life going on. You can look here. I've got you a graph in your notes. You can see where there's some riots. So what happens when two people don't like each other? They start fighting. And so the Brits are caught in the middle of the Arabs and the Hebrew people fighting. And I know I'm giving this a very quick flyover. You can do the rest of this yourself. So it's not working out very good at all right? World War I ends. Germany is decimated. There's a guy that walks on the scene by the name of Adolf Hitler. His entire understanding, wrong choice of words. His entire premise is he's a nationalistic person as well. He wants Germany not to be put under because, I can't remember the compact that was put out, but it stripped basically Germany of any ability to produce a war, to produce much of anything, because they caused World War I. So Hitler can see Germany not having nationalism. And so he spins to get what he wants, which is control, that the reason that Germany has nothing is because of Jewish people. He thinks Jewish people are the ones who ended the war and cost Germany all of its resources. So it's a broad brush, but you can do the history. I'm just giving you a little oversight here. So the first thing Hitler wants to do is we've got to have a strong government. He's right. We got to have a strong military. He's right if you want to be a nation. But his way of getting it done was we need to expel Jews from their professions, bar them from teaching in their universities, and begin attacking their businesses. And I read a lot about this, and you have too if you like World War II. And then he started rounding up, sounds just like they did in the Pale of Settlement, all these Hebrew people and putting them in ghettos. At the same time, not all, but a lot of the weapons that would have helped Germany win the war if really they had tried hard, and this may be a political statement you don't like, was Hebrew people. They were good to help them with weapons, but not good enough for anything else. Now, I'm going to get a little bit out here. This is the part that bothers me because I'm a human. I have a hard time understanding what goes on in human history. I was probably in the 8th grade. I remember going to my junior high. I had 2 study halls. That's the worst thing to give a 15-year-old in the world or a 14-year-old, 2 study halls. What are you going to do? Go to the library and look at what? And it was some big books. I remember I found when I was looking through the library in one of my study halls, and it was books on World War II, and I didn't know much about World War II. I remember taking these books off, and I have some of them in my office right now because Brother Savoy gave them to me. And I started opening the pages, and I started looking at things going, how do people hate others like that? And then you keep flipping through some of these books, and I found some things that bothered me. I remember the first time I came home, and I asked my mom and dad, Auschwitz? A 13-year-old boy's mind could not handle the pictures I was seeing and the thought that we could care so little about a human life that we could take away with such ease. So that got me to reading more and more about it. And the more I learned, and this is all history, you can find this out, Hitler creates a campaign called the Final Solution. Matter of fact, January the 20th, 1942 is when this starts happening. In a rich, estate called Wannsee, which happened to be owned by Jewish people until Hitler came to power. 15 people sat at a table led by a man by the name of Reinhard Heydrich. And they talked about Hebrew people. And for some of you, this is going to be, I'm not going to get graphic. It went from the immigration of Hebrew people to the evacuation of Hebrew people. The policy made this: all marriages between any Hebrews and anyone else was annulled immediately. Any Jew over the age of 65 was sent to old age ghettos to die of old age. Europeans with one Jewish grandparent were to be sterilized. And to be sterilized, that was forced, simply because you had some blood of Jewish in your body. All at the same time, this group of 15 people began to construct what they called camps. None of them in Germany, all on the outside of Germany to handle the problems. So starting from the west in France, going to the east, they begin to move all these Jews into these camps. Auschwitz, lifespan from the moment the train dropped an individual off, 7 hours. That should bother you when I say that. And I'm going to be a little more vocal tonight because we have ran into this nation, this huge wave of anti-Semitism, and it seems like nobody really cares. Please make another statement. I don't need him, and I appreciate what you're saying. I'm not trying to stir a pot, but I'm going to make another statement. It was just a few years ago that everything became a very racist, and we could not become racist. And now it's okay to hate on an entire group of people, and I still haven't figured that one out either, and I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. We are becoming what it looked like a little under 100 years ago right now. And I talked about it when we had this lesson planned was I can tell the story, I can skip over some of these parts. And it was decided, and people don't tell me what to preach or how to preach, but when I asked for advice, I want it. And it was decided it should be talked about in this class, because if we don't talk about this, then it's going to be easy not to have any conviction about it's just some people in another part of the world that has nothing to do with me. It has a lot to do with us. And next week we'll tie all those together. And so from the time you got off of the train in Auschwitz, and I was supposed to go to Auschwitz at the end of February, hopefully I'll get a chance to go, 7 hours. 15,000 human lives could be taken and incinerated and left with just ashes in one day. Now, once again, I'm sorry, I'm a human. I could be a Hebrew born in that time. Somebody needs to have a voice and say something about it. This systematic state-sponsored murder, sorry if I'm a little passionate, of 6 million people before the world woke up and said, we probably should do something about this. Okay. It was probably the most catastrophic event in the Jewish history, but it was also one of the most turning points that led to where we're at right now. So following the war, there are Jewish people. Where are they going to go? They're scattered in Europe, the ones that are still alive. So now there's even more thought. We should be going to our own home where we can get away from this persecution, because things are going to continue to happen again. The British mandate is still enforced, but they're having a hard time with it. So now you've got the British going, let's slow down on this, bringing too many people into Israel, because the Arabs are upset. But Europe's got to rebuild. And then there were just I'm going to use the word, the strong will of Hebrew people going, we're going home whether you let us or not. So they start buying entire boats and trying to cross the channel to get to Israel, not the channel, but that ocean. This is more than Great Britain can handle. So Great Britain says, we're just going to step out of this. This is the quick of it. And in 1947, they create what they call the UN General Assembly Resolution 181. I think I even have a picture of it. We're just going to divide up the Jewish state, the Palestinian state. You've heard that word in the news for the last 100 years, if you've been along that route. So the Jewish state would be 55% of Palestine, and that was accepted by the Jews. The Arab state would be 45% of Palestine, which was rejected by all of the Arabs. And then Jerusalem would be an international zone. We can talk about that another point. The votes go like this: 33 to 13 with 10 abstentions. The Jewish are going to get their homeland back. The Arabs immediately reject this in a big civil war. And there's a lot to talk about that. I don't have time tonight. So for almost a year, 1947 to May of 1948, there's this huge ruckus. Everybody is upset. It's finally in May of 1948 that the UN declares Israel is a nation. When they do this, it's right before, well, it's on that date. I have a picture of a guy by the name of David Ben-Gurion. He's the one that stands up and says, Israel is now a nation again, makes a very big statement. The UN falls right in behind him. The United States recognizes this immediately, but within 5 hours, 5 Arab nations attack Israel. And in history, it's called the Great Catastrophe. Egypt went for Tel Aviv, Jordan and the Arab Legion, which was a very powerful group militarily, aimed for Jerusalem. And then the Iraqis, the Syrians, and the Lebanese went for everything else. And all of them, except for the Jordanian Arab Legion, were defeated. The Jordanians did control some of Jerusalem. Are y'all still okay with this? A lot of Arabs lost their lives, but about 6,000 Hebrews lost their lives. But it was more costly on the Hebrews than it was for the Arabs, because 6,000 people was 1%. That's hard to believe, of their entire population. Now, this is where I got to get this to. You can look at this, and I've heard the word used, and I try not to use it too often, or it's just a geopolitical conflict. You can look at it that way if you want to be a sterilized person and act like God has no say in the affairs of men at this day. Or you can say there is a God whose hand is on a nation. And I'm not trying to be a homer for Israel. We'll talk about this a little bit more. They have some different thoughts about things. Matter of fact, I'm looking at a group of people. Most of you, if I say we stand with Israel, you're going to raise your hand. If I was to take you 2 doors over, there's a group of people called your kids and your grandkids, and the narrative has been told a whole lot different. They think Israel is the bad guy. That's why I'm talking about this. Just for another point of view, I will be talking to them about this in a condensed version as well, because once again, it has to be said. So there's either a God who told Abraham something and is true, who told Moses something and is true, who sent prophets all along the way that spoke about what would happen. And then we have John the Revelator, and we have the book of Daniel and other ones that will tell us how this thing's going to wind up. And I'll take a couple of thoughts about that, and there's some smart people in this room. We'll all talk about it. But when Israel gathered together, that brought together a religious hope for some people who didn't think they even had hope. I got to be careful because I know this is being live streamed. I'm going to wait till I'm not live streaming. I'll say something in a minute. It also brought together a group of people who began to expose how bad the Holocaust really was. The reason we know some things about that is because the IDF got very much involved in running down the people and chasing down the people who were responsible for it, or it could have been simply kicked under the rug. It's not just a theological dimension of what's going on here. It's what God has planned, and we got to keep that in the forefront of our mind. So all of the history of the Jewish people, which has been persecuted for millennials, for the Word of God has a statement about this. This coming together was a really big deal. Now that's got us to 10 minutes till 8, and that's when I have to stop, because next week we're going to talk about what happened from May of 1948 to literally, what's next week's date? I don't know, whatever it is, April the 29th.